Good day, everyone. This is Stephanie Jeanette Bradley again, and I'm going to read a book that I wrote back in 2004 and then to share a short story that goes with it. Okay. By the way, you can actually purchase this at smashwords.com. My name, Stephanie Jeanette Bradley, Bradley is the author. It's called Autometron, Autometran. Ben was walking along Route 9. It was a typical night in terms of the weather for Sassafrasville in mid-October. Cool breezes, just sharp enough to make him pull his cap down a little lower, and just kind enough to let him keep his jacket unzipped. It was a nice change, really. Being with the earth and the atmosphere was just what he needed now. An occasional Trans-L passed by, filled with the local kiddies on their way to the weekend playhouse. Normally, he would have gone up and out too, but since he was the last single person in town, he volunteered to chaperone the playhouse while the parents all went up and out. So he let Sam, his neighbor and colleague, borrow his Autometron for the trip. A neophyte, Sam had yet to finish designing and building his own Autometron, but he's such an energetic and enthusiastic member of the community that he was allowed to join in on the trip. Typically, a husband has to have fully completed his own family Autometron, but Sam seemed to be going all out. So, since everyone in Sassafrasville is excited about seeing the finished product, they kind of let him get away with shirking many usual rules and regulations. He had offered to Zoom him on home or to the playhouse, Sam did. But Ben told him not to worry about it. So he imagined that by now, Sam and his wife Kim were already halfway to landing. Ah, the lovely earthly wind. This would definitely be the east winds originating from the galaxy Tyrian. He could tell by the way the hairs on his forearms were tingled and rustled to and fro in varying directions. That was the only way he knew, in fact. But for his love of nature, he imagined he'd go insane. Nothing, no one around him, no one he could call his own, no one to rustle his hairs, no one, nothing but the wind. Sad on the surface, perhaps profoundly so. Nonetheless, he wouldn't allow himself to feel too deeply concerning the matter. The neighbors' jokes about him having a recessive Catholic gene, a calculably impossible result since the 2024 census cleansing 2 years ago, didn't seem to bother him anymore. And although he's thought of going before the commission to plead his case, he didn't think they'd listen to him, being just one. So Ben looked forward to spending the next 8 suns with the kiddies. He considered time with the innate joy and curiosity of encapsulated formations, EFs for short, to be much more of a vacation than spending time forcing smiles amongst the resultants, while numbing their way through contrived activities. So, while he had no intention of putting in any order for EFs as a single male, he had already written them out and was simply waiting for his female counterpart to complete the picture. However, it seems strange. I have this is like one of my original prints, and you can see where I lived at the time that I wrote it, up the top there. And you can also see my rather dark so-called watermark. So Having been single much longer than any other resultant of his generation, Ben recognized the essential problem. Basically, as he saw it, the commission designed incorrectly the resultant periods. Also, it seems to have based all on generalizations, like EFs are resilient, and that basic survival needs of Earth resident resultants are food, shelter, clothing, and love, in that order. Assumptions that, as far as Ben could deduce, were jarringly and glaringly erroneous. First of all, if EFs were ever so resilient, there wouldn't be a commission. As it is, the commission evolved out of the need to eliminate the crippled Sucane states in the resultants the EFs were growing up to be. And I spell that P as in Peter, S as in Sam, U-K-H-E-I-N. As you can tell, this is a fantasy type story. So now we have manufactured resilience designed EFs who pose no growth adjustment change to their sponsors because the EFs are always happy, never disappointed, have been given no memory capacities. On the surface, this seems great, but Ben's seen a lot of encapsulated formations whose programs get stuck and they never move on to new joys. They ask the same questions over and over again for up to 2 moons at a time, shorter only if the reprogramming cable isn't backlogged, which only happens if the repeating cycle error, RCE, or loop for short, occurs within a half moon of the annual load leveling. Which is saying a lot because Sassafrasville is one of the lesser populated enclaves, so it really should never take us so long to get such things completed. Now the thing about the food, shelter, clothing, love order is that, again, it's based on only partial human information. All cable gathered data from Billidum. None of it is based on individual self-reports, journals, or autobiographies. Therefore, none of it tasks the system to recognize or account for functioning quote-unquote anomalies. All is just very sterile data, undoubtedly inadequate, because the researchers already had in mind preconceptions of what they wanted to work with. It wasn't that they were jaded or closed-minded. The members of the commission were simply too spineless, too afraid, and too coded to handle all possibilities of data. So they limited all input. The effect, of course, is underdeveloped resultants who don't know it. And again, on the surface, this seems fine because no one's complaining. But the problem is that it isn't because resultants aren't experiencing discomfort. It's because they're not programmed to express their discomfort. So, like the EFs, the resultants are also looping, but because of the intensification of the joy gene during every leveling and senses cleansing, their pleasure loops override their discomfort. So every time one is on the verge of discovering and creating something new to introduce into the enclave, be it a concept or tool or program, sure, he simply loses the passion to bring the thing to fruition. The lack of discomfort obliterates the need for discovery. So these interchanges of discomfort states and idiosyncrasies remain unresolved and yield resultants like Finney, who didn't eat that much when he was prolifically pursuing his new ideas. But before he could progress, he was leveled out again. So his cycle manifested itself as an eating disorder, quote unquote. And the commission's treatment was extra leveling, which only exacerbated the root of this problematic cycle. The fact of the matter, as best Ben could tell was that whenever Finney, albeit he's of the same basic resultant program structure, and so should require no more and no less food intake than any other resultant, whenever he reached functioning in his passion mode of discovery and creation and invention, his minimal resultant functioning requirements, MRFRs for short, shifted. He didn't need as much food intake. So while the commission reviewed this as a program malfunction, which is actually an improvement from the times when they viewed this as submersive defiance and would simply deplug such resultants, Finney was in fact functioning at optimal level. Well, in absolute truth, Ben didn't know if it was Finney's optimal level per se, and as long as the hedo-leveling reinforcements continued, no one would ever know his full capacity. Another example, a very sad example, Ben consciously reminds himself not to entertain the concept of sad, quote unquote. Perchance he say it out loud to some other resultant and be reported to the commission. A seemingly joy-challenged example is that of Saladay, who, even before her prime, which for the average resultant is 212 moons, was able to generate 10 times as many automatrons and sound waves. This capacity was very important to the Enclave for two major and specific reasons. One, 70% of the resultants are doctors, that is, programmers. They are always on call and must not be interrupted with the matters of automatron development or maintenance. And while their participation in daily needs activities is optional, just about none of them ever choose to do so. So Saladay's ability to conceive exceptionally efficient and appealing automatrons contributed greatly to the well-being of the entire enclave. Similarly, her sound abilities were just as in demand, if not more so. See, what happened was when the commission excluded all of the sounds of things reminiscent of sadness, disappointment, and the like from the main cable source, we lost all sounds of nature. While our utterances one to another could be mutually exchanged, no earthly nature sounds were perceivable. This is why Ben enjoyed walking a lot, especially on windy nights. He held on to hope. Oops. Ben second guesses himself at this thought, wondering if it sounded too close to sadness. That one day he'd hear nature from the earth. One day, just maybe, he'd hear the wind rustle the leaves, or the rocks skipping the lake, or the lake bumping against itself, or bumping into itself, or his leather moccasins crunching against the dirt. One day, again. But for now, Ben simply loaned out his automatron as often as possible, so that he'd have the opportunity to take a walk without anyone labeling him as malfunctioning. He had already alerted suspicion from the commission because of his frequent visits to the sound room. In the sound room, everyone met the famous Saladay. Oh, not in person anymore, or so Ben thought. But in listening to all the sounds she was able to create and catalog, one got to know her very well. It was clear to Ben that she was beyond her time. Her programming, albeit the same as all the others of her generation, had somehow allowed unanticipated success. And despite her apparent genius, Ben could still hear room for improvement. That is to say, Saladay's sound works have a clearly distinctive signature. So, Ben reasoned, there must be even greater potential for sounds once one is able to vary up that distinction. Not to disrespect Saladay in any way. As a matter of fact, Given her supreme skills with a wide variety of sound, Ben surmised that Soliday had deliberately limited her sounds to these many signature pieces, quote unquote, as if she anticipated a sound evolution and wanted to maintain a certain genre, so to speak, as well as leave room for other resultants to enjoy participation. Of course, it could have just been logistically convenient given the Commission's prioritization of her automatron workload. Actually, Soliday's sound work also seemed to contain specific rhythms and groupings that conveyed certain messages. Ben couldn't quite put his finger on it, but he had this nagging sense that there was definitely something in there. Something extra. Truth be told, Ben knew it for sure. But he had to limit his thoughts concerning the matter, lest he get too comfortable with himself and blurt it out. You see, Ben's grandmother had passed something on to him. One son, after his adult, that is to say, his first resultant leveling, his grandma injected him. She told him he must never utter a word about it to anyone. Not even his wife in the far future, not even his mom. She explained to him that the injection would impart to him the ability to hear Earth nature. It would take 12 to 36 It would take 12 to 36 hours to start working and would last through all the next resultant leveling. Depending on one's vocation and current generational experience, the frequency of their resultant levelings varied, unless of course it wasn't in mass leveling. He begged her to wait until after his first resultant leveling to give it to her, but she said it was too risky because there was no way of knowing how long he'd have that hearing ability, since the levelings weren't pre-scheduled. So he'd have to maintain that secret for an unknown length of time. Too risky. So by the time he was on his way, walking to the main cable cul-de-sac, he was able, and the sounds he heard were indescribable. He could hear the birds chirping and landing on trees and pecking at the ground. Leaves rustled as they blew in the wind, which orchestrated itself through a myriad of items, creating a symphony of unpredictable sound. Some of the leaves were still on the trees. Some made their journey along the ground, aided by the wind. He smiled at the sound of the rocks as he skipped them along the lake's waves, which lapped into themselves and clapped appreciation for the wind's orchestra. The others around him thought he was happy because he made several successful skips. But no, the smile on Ben's face was for the sound. Even the not-so-successful skips had a sound to give. Far above all other sounds, though, he enjoyed most the full-scale, all-instrumental sections included sounds of the thunderstorm that struck up just before he was due to enter the leveling facility. The electricity of the universe crashed as cymbals. Brass conductors carried the storm's messages. Sounds of thunder tried to soothe the exuberance of the lightning by lending resonant tones like those of a stout ashiko drum. The woodwind section completed the task, fading away in rumbling reassurance of the onus of the string's staccato promise pounded out in each continuing raindrop. Oh, it was awesome. It was all Ben could do not to jump out of his skin, quote unquote, which he knew was technically impossible anymore since the Commission discarded that exact phrase out of the programming very early on when the EFs actually obliged to do so whenever they became overly excited. And the Commission, how pleased they were with him. They knew that Ben comes from a creative and challenging gene stock. Remembering his lineage, they expected he'd be late or not show up at all and have to be sought out for his first resultant leveling, or worse, deplugged. But instead, there he was, close to first in line with a pep in his step to boot, and none bothered by the rain. By the way, rain which only seems to descend upon Sassafrasville when there is a leveling. Ben's big smile didn't make them suspicious at all, neither before receiving his first resultant leveling nor after he left. Well, of course, by then he was walking away and they didn't see his smile drop, although they did wonder why he'd taken off his hood and held out his hands to catch the rain, as the rain simulation is experienced by everyone very early on in the EF stage. But Ben was trying to imagine the sound of the rain as it danced onto his skin. He could feel the rhythm. He just couldn't hear it. He was devastated by the lack of sound from nature, or rather, by his inability to receive the sound conveyance. His smile dropped so hard one could hear it bounce back up and become the frown he now wore. It was a good thing it was raining and resultants were walking about without really looking up at one another. Ben tried to coax nature into letting him hear it again. He pleaded with the rain, threw stones, kicked up dirt, ran after birds, and shook branches. Nothing worked. At that time, of course, he didn't know which was better, because it wasn't allowed to think words. To have heard nature or never. By the time he got home, his newfound frown had left markedly recognizable creases in his chin. So when his grandma opened the door and saw him, she yanked him in fast and rushed him to her room. "Ouch," he said. Oh no, Grandma thought. She'd created a monster. Ben gasped too at his utterance, because he'd never before had a problem with keeping his quote-unquote uncommissioned thoughts without sound, unvoiced. Grandma had to collect herself, had to figure out how best to tell him and just how much to tell him. Feeling assured about the same time as the rain stopped, she began. "Ben?" "Yes, Nana." "Ben?" "Yes, Nana." "Ben?" "Nana, yes." "Perfect, my child. You will do well," she said as she smiled a sigh of relief. She explained, "Remember, Ben, to recognize the order of things, especially sounds. The order of sound, the timing of sound, and many, many more characteristics of sound nature that you have yet to experience, or what make the difference in every aspect of the world, every world, even here in little old Sassafrasville, perhaps especially here. You have just demonstrated to me, Ben, that you recognize, at the least, the importance of its order and its timing, and most significantly, by the FROWN on your face. I know that you also recognize its magnificence." She hugged him, holding him tight, and as she does so, passes on to him in virtue of sound, and much of it as she could spare before her own deplugging. On his part, Ben felt a sense of calm, peace, and questfulness, all welling up inside him simultaneously. Grandma gave him a little extra virtue, sensing he could handle it and indeed required it, since he loved sound nature so much. It was all she could do not to tell him sorry. Sorry for having opened his heart to an unattainable thing. But she knew that was just her feelings talking. In natural truth, it was the best thing that would ever happen to him, surpassed only by one other. Now he was smiling again. A substantive smile, not an empty one. A smile of sober understanding and a passionate sense of purpose. "Nan, when will I hear it again?" This question brought her even greater joy, greater because she knew that the question predicted an answer. Again. "Ben, I have only 2 more doses left. They are for you and your wife, if you choose to take one take one on. If you choose to take one on, or you and your child, you can decide with or without consulting your wife. You will have to carefully monitor the times of the levelings. In the future, they may become regularized, and so you'd have to be aware for optimal use of your hearing time. You have to coordinate that awareness with your quest to hear sound again. From what we know so far, who's we? Oops. Grandma hadn't intended to go that far. Ben must really be connected. I'll fill you in after. Okay, so as I was explaining, we know of only 2 avenues you may use to perceive this sound in nature. One is to keep that gene inside of you, overriding the levelings. And the other way is to develop more injection serum. Now about the we. There are at least 3 other families left who have either serum left over or an override patch that they've developed. Naturally, the patches do not help other families. We tried that in my generation. 2 of the families have children of your mom's generation, 1 female and 2 males. One of the males is already and currently married. It doesn't seem that he shared any of this information with his wife. Same for the female. The other male is a widower. He's been reclusive since her deplugging, and it hasn't been revealed to anyone whether or not he'd shared any information with her, nor whether she in turn told anyone else. We also do not know whether or not he's made any advances in either of the avenues, or perhaps some other new avenue conceived. As well, he may still have some serum. We are all extremely concerned about him, but are unable to visit with him often, lest we bring suspicion on ourselves and each other. Similarly, because he's so despondent, we cannot risk being discovered indulging in a down mode. Such was the title given to any resultant displaying such behavior. However, we have arrangements, discreet and without apparent connection, that gets regular visitors to him. So, on the surface, his visage facade is well maintained, and no frown lines have taken a hold of him in many, many moons. The 3rd family has a daughter of your generation, who presumably would be your wife. Lest, of course, there's some deplugging and replugging by the commission before that time comes. She's the only other single person of Sassafrasville of your generation. Then you should also know, and she held his hand at this point, that your mom is also of the hearing, nature hearing, and had no visible response, although Grandma thought she did see his eyes twinkle. It all made sense to him now, why he and his mom had such trouble spending time together. How his curiosity seemed to depress her instead of bringing greater joy, like most resultants experience in the presence of children. He knew now, he understood. For once and firsthand, he could see from her views. He felt his heart soften in the part that was her. Grandma felt it too, in him. She took joy as she lamented. She knew the commission would mistakenly attribute Ben's change, his profound growth, to the leveling, and in so doing, information that could greatly advance Sassafrasville may never see the full light of day. But at this time, that was the best. Nana, is that why Mom stays below cable level and incommunicado, receives no one, not even old-style mail? Then, now more than ever, your mom's condition must be kept guarded. I know it's fun challenge, but it's most necessary, and I expect you to be faithful in it. Now, concerning her wise, it's not all as simple as that, but I'd hoped you'd now desire to speak with her directly regarding the matter. Can I, Nana? May I visit with her? Maybe we can have dinner together today. Please, Nene, please. Of course you can, Ben. That you ask lets me know that I should further explain to you the fullness of your sound nature. Listen, now that you've heard firsthand from nature, it is now in your hands to treasure it. Treasure the experience, treasure the actual sounds, treasure the interaction. Treasure that which is outside yourself, yet recognizable because of what is in you. What I'm saying to you is this. It is incumbent upon you to remember the importance of order and of timing. That you beg me in such a manner demonstrates your reaching back to a once familiar place. You have moved beyond that place then. You have moved beyond and are unable to return. You must remember where you are so that you can successfully ascertain the proper order and timing. You will do fine, son. You will do fine, son. It is imperative that you do so. Grandma's ways have withstood the test of sound as far as Ben could tell, and as he came upon the grounds of the kiddie playhouse, a strong breeze blew across his path. It was distinguishable, undeniably so. But not until he stepped inside the channel did he realize just how essential was that wind's order and timing. As the door opened, sound poured out, and a vision of unforetold beauty stood bent over before him. He apologized that his entrance had caused all the music sheets to spill over as he helped gather them up. It was when she smiled substantively and said, "No problem, my dear," that he noticed the jovial essence inside the irises of her eyes, as well as the sultry resonance of her voice, Shaddai-esque. The kids had been singing the sounds of the Amazon people, such that when he opened the channel, the sounds of nature had poured forth, and for a brief, precious moment, he'd heard it again. So much sensory love all at once. He was surprised he hadn't blown a circuit, so to speak. The wind, the sound nature, the eyes, and inside the wind, inside the pouring sound, inside her smile, inside her eyes, inside the essence of all this, and the essence of the wind was the essence of Nanan. It was all beyond great, beyond significant, beyond exact, beyond Sassafrasville. Especially since no result had ever experienced the smell of the essence of another without him or her actually being there, of the same leveling, of the same time, of the same order, let alone be plugged. But it was true. He'd experienced it just now for himself. Maybe others had experienced it also, but had never told anyone for fear of being labeled malfunctioning, quote unquote. This must be what Grandma had meant on that simultaneously bright and dreary day. The day of his first adult leveling. How she'd said sound nature impacts every aspect of the world. This is the seed she'd planted, but because of my limited experience, because of his limited experience, she could not fully explain it to Ben at that time. Now, she'd finished the message, or maybe just started. Grandma's ridden the waves of sound, traveled across channels, and hugged him again. He'd heard of her, but somehow their paths had never crossed. Not until now. So this is why Sam had that sheepish smirk on his face as they parted when he loaned him his automatron. Here, his wife-to-be, Sassafrasville's only other single, never-married resultant, was also chaperoning the kiddie playhouse while the others went up and out. He thought it would be one of the T resultants, transitioning resultants, who'd be in charge of the kiddies until he arrived. Instead, All of the kitties were joyous and substantively enjoying the direction of Saint-Gervais. It was clear that she'd mastered sound. Even their seemingly impromptu version of the Amazon people was far removed from even the esteemed Saladay's translation as heard in the sound room. And that, until this moment, had been his favorite piece to listen to there. The ancient people of the Amazon gathered together in sound and oneness of order and time. Each seemed to have possessed specialized sounds of nature, be it a certain bird or monkey or frog or insect or tree leaf rustling or water flowing. When they would be with one another in sound, they must have connected on all available levels, because it's told that even the animals mistook the people's renditions as calls from their own species. The synchronization varied like an electric current, transferring, igniting, unifying, contributing, applauding. It's also recorded that the collective sound vibrations would reach such a height and depth and breadth that the next sun would appear earlier than its cyclic measure. That's how he finally understood what his grandma had mentioned about how sound nature has the ability to change color. At the time, he thought she was being poetic, and perhaps she was, but that poeticism had not limited its literal truth. And the story goes on. Actually, in the copy and smash words, I have a more extended version. And so this comes the part where the actual story. Okay, so again, I wrote that in 2004, and my first time I came to Montana was 2010, and I was in Billings. And I attended a church that was within walking distance of where I lived. And one of the members there, Wendy, I shared her this story with her. And she noticed on the date on it, the month and day was the same as her daughter's. And I mean, that coupled with the story itself, is what happens is when Ben goes to have dinner with his mom, Soliday, when he goes to the below cable level, basically a basement kind of thing you would envision, all the walls were just blank, and they're like gray or pale white, I forget. And what happens is their exchange is first color, and they're communicating through color. And the mom is so excited, there's color is just going all over the walls. And so with that, Wendy shared with me the fact that the Lord had told her to learn piano and play it for the church. And she'd been doing that for years, even though I think she'd only been at that church for a year before I'd gotten there. And of course, people would, kind of, how it is, if you're just new on a scene, whatever the scene may be, people are going to try to make it seem like you don't belong or what have you. But she played very well. And the Lord also revealed to her that he was having her heal people through the music. And she got confirmation of that once when someone was visiting that church and shared with her that they could see the sound coming out of her piano, out of the keyboard, coming out as color and entering people and healing. And so it was just, I don't know, very magnificent experience. And it kind of reminds me also of the whole part of laser surgery and the different levels of lasering. Just the fact that a stream of light, which is essentially a combination of colors at different concentrations, could zap into us and know what doesn't belong. Profound. Well, that's it for today. Have an excellent St. Patty's Day this weekend coming up. I'll probably log something before then or on the weekend. There's another PGA Tour So it should be an interesting game this weekend coming up. And again, it's smashwords.com. My name, Stephanie Jeanette Bradley, if you're interested in Automatron. And I have a few other ebooks written there as well. Have an excellent evening.